I'm not sure what you mean by practicing specific types of or components in writing. I don't really have my students ever write narratives because I teach academic writing too mostly, and also that's the kind of style of writing I feel least comfortable with, both as a teacher and as a writer, at least academically. So I don't really have them do that. I do a lot of practice of OSIE formatting. So for those who don't know what that is, it's development, and it's having an observation, using your source, interpreting the source, and then explaining how that source connects to your thesis. So it is a way that they can develop their paragraphs and to have full ideas. So I do have them practice that a lot, but otherwise, I don't necessarily think I have them practice specific types of writing outside of the stuff that they're assigned. I do assign peer review in my classroom. I go back and forth on it all the time, whether it's helpful, because I always get peer review isn't helpful because, I don't want to know what my peer thinks because they don't know what they're talking about. I want to know what you think, or they're not giving me good feedback. But I do think it's positive in a few ways. One, I can teach and model how they need to be reviewing other people's works. I give them guided peer review, so it's not just read it and tell them what you think. I give them specific questions and guideposts along the way. So for example, in my peer review worksheet, the very first thing is the writer themselves will look at their writing and say, okay, given 24 more hours, what would I do with this piece? So what do I still have left to do? Or is there anything specific I want the peer reviewer to keep in mind? And then the next thing, the first thing for the editor is read the first paragraph, stop. Okay, what do you think this paper is going to be about? So I really do guide them through the process and ask specific questions. And then as it goes on, it becomes more open-ended. Like, what do you think the biggest strength of this paper is? What do you think is the main thing that they should keep working on? Identify some places that are unclear. So I really do provide some guidance for how they need to do that. And ideally, that should help them do a better peer review. This semester, wasn't so successful with the primary source paper. So for the lit review, when we do our peer review, I'm going to do a little bit of a lecture beforehand so that they have a better idea of how to have developed answers. But I do think it's positive overall. It helps them become a better reviewer. It gives them a chance to read their classmates' work, which I think is really important because they can get ideas from each other and they can learn how to give feedback in a positive way and then ask questions in a positive way. So I think that's all good things for peer review. When I started the class, I typically used, and in the class that you looked at, I used Blackboard. I bring up the Blackboard site and just sit it on our modules page so they see where it is and they can see all the attachments. So I can tell them until I'm blue in the face that we have all these attachments that we went over in class on Blackboard, but sometimes students don't listen. So I just have it as a visual at the beginning of every class. So the beginning of every class, while they're waiting for me to start talking, they see the stuff up there. And sometimes that sparks them to remember that it's up there. I think I use technology more so in class now because it's a way for students to visually pay attention. In the class that you watched, I used Blackboard. I used the actual board in front of the room, the physical board. I used a Word document. I used YouTube. And then in the class before the one that you observed, I used Google Docs. So students had it in front of them and they saw it up at the board. I think students tend to need some place to look when they're listening. So if I don't want them to look at their computers and at Facebook, I keep them looking up at the front of the room, whether that's at a PowerPoint or what I'm writing on the board or something visual that they can look at. It kind of grounds them and to keep them listening. So I really do try to keep visuals up at all times. I think it stems from the fact that as a student, I am not an auditory learner. So just listening to somebody talk does not work for me at all. I'm very visual or hands-on. So if I can do one or the other of those, I feel a little bit more successful. Yeah, I started an activity with them doing something more fun and visual, and then had the students apply the method to their project. I do that because I think it's helpful for them to learn how to do something by doing it. So I know learning styles are debated all the time. So I talked about auditory learners, visual learners. Well, there are also kinesthetic learners. However you want to define those, there are people who do better when they're doing the thing. So I want to get them into doing the thing right away. And when it's with their own project, a lot of times they're bored or they're not interested or they're confused and scared to even start. So if I have them do the activity with something easier or something fun, so for example, in the class that you looked at, they were doing synthesis. And before I had them do that with their own articles, I had them do it with songs, Disney songs to be specific. And I think it helps them get involved and not be afraid to do stuff because it's something to them that seems easier and more approachable. And then once they've done it, I'm like, okay, it's that exact same thing, but do it with these academic articles. So they remember how to do it, they've done it before, and it's not so scary. I don't think it would have been as successful if I had just said, okay, here's what synthesis is, now do it in your articles, because one, they wouldn't have been quote unquote woken up by the activity. They may or may not have listened to me at the beginning. I'm very cognizant of the fact that sometimes students just aren't listening until you actually have them do stuff. And sometimes they learn along the way when they're doing the activity. So no, I think they would have hated it. It would have been a boring class had I not included the activity. As for my question of whether I bribe my students, not typically. I think making that a habit isn't a good thing, but every so often I will. Primarily, the reason why I joked about bribing my students with candy to be good during my observation is because I know sometimes when people are being observed, they're nervous, even though I said they were observing me, not them. So I kind of use the bribe as almost humor to make the situation less intimidating. So it wasn't even really about bribing them. It was more about joking about bribing them, if that makes any sense. But I will bring candy because I'm not gonna not follow through. I think typically I'll use candy or treats in other instances, like sometimes we'll do activities in class where I'll have the students in teams and the most successful team will win candy. And so that's just something to get them excited at the outset, because college students love free stuff, especially if it's food. So it's not necessarily a bribe, it's more of an incentive, if anything. But I do think it helps stir them into getting excited right away about something that may not be exciting. Hopefully this helped. Feel free to ask me any more questions if you have them.